In this video, we are going to be looking at debugging the issue, the client, and then a client listed with object ID of, and usually there's a GUID, does not have authorization to perform action, Microsoft.datafactory.factories link services right over the scope of subscription. There will be a subscription ID right here, a resource group name here, providers, and then of course we have, in this case, the linked service or the scope is invalid. Now, there's a couple things to note about this error. First of all, and that is we're looking at link services, but it could easily be data sets, it could be pipelines, it could be any of those things, right? What's happening here is that this particular client, in this case, it could be anything. We could call it, let's say, John Doe. John Doe with an object ID, which is a GUID. He's trying to perform a write operation, but he does not have access, in this case, to the resource group. So when we look at this, one of the things we have to do, or one of the things we should do, is we should grant the access on the resource group level, not data factory. So if you grant it on the data factory level, at least as of the time of this recording, I should note that, of course, Microsoft changes things, so I can just see in a year from now people are like, well, actually, but if you were to do it right now, the data factory itself would not help you. So let's say that the only permission you want to give is read and write. Let's just say hypothetically, you would grant that read and write on the resource group level. Okay. So again, at the time of this video, it would not be the data factory, and it is because they need the resource group. Another thing I would point out too as well is that if you're worried about permissions or security, one of the things, and again, this is at the time of this video, Microsoft in Azure does not charge for the resource group, right? So what that means is you can set up a resource group and then you can put a data factory in that resource group. So we might have a data factory, or we might have a resource group for all of our data factories, right? That might be something that we do if we're willing for teams to share those. So keep that in mind. We might not actually want that, right? We might have a resource group per data factory in some cases. So, but at the time of this video, since they're not charging for this, you can scale security on the basis of the resource group. So just keep that in the back of your mind. I will say that that may change in the future, and it's because people may be doing what I'm suggesting there. Okay, and then the other thing we want to evaluate, so we grant access on the resource group, but just the appropriate permissions. So as I mentioned, read and write, that might be the appropriate permission, but we might grant something like contributor, or if it's, let's say, the project lead, we might want them actually to be the administrator. So those might be the appropriate permissions. And again, it's going to depend on how we've scaled our data factories relative to our resource group. So the idea is that if it is, let's say, one resource group per data factory, that might be something that we're willing to extend more permissions. But if we want to be incredibly strict, then we would go with the basic permissions that they need. So this is just looking at this error here when it comes to this. And again, what you might see instead of linked services is you might see something along the lines of like pipelines or data sets, etc. Link services is just one of the things that you can write or read in Data Factory.